The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to today's quick webcast. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and I have with me my colleague Nicole Lawhorn, who will be your presenter. A couple quick housekeeping items. In the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel, we do have a handout for you, which are a copy of today's slides. If you're not able to download it, do not despair, because we will be also sending it out to you via email afterwards. And then also, if you have any questions while Nicole is presenting, please put those questions in the question box, and all the questions will be responded to once Nicole's presentation completes. So with that, Nicole, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you, Victoria. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking time out of your very busy day for this. So greatly appreciated. I am just going to start this off with, I do have a little furry friend currently laying at my feet. He typically is very, very good during presentations, but I'm going to apologize in advance if he starts barking and I have to temporarily mute. So he does very well, but I know if I don't give that caveat, then it all goes awry. So we will be talking about the local LEP participation requirement review form today. It is a requirement if you want to participate in the local LEP program. I do have my contact information on the very last slide. So Victoria said we would be taking questions, but if you think of something later as you're diving through the form, I know I tend to not really think of a question on the spot always, but as I mull it over, I think of it later. So you will have my contact information, and so feel free to reach out, give me a phone call, shoot me an email, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of the questions. So Ohio is fortunate enough to have the flexibility to allow local public agencies the option to administer federally funded transportation projects themselves. However, ODOT is still ultimately responsible for ensuring that LPAs are still following federal and state laws, regulations, and policies, as we are the pass-through entity. So LPAs wanting to participate in ODOT's local LEP program must demonstrate they can successfully administer and deliver a federal aid project, and this is done through your staffing, previous project experience, and documented processes. Participation in the local LEP program is at ODOT's discretion and is based on the LPA's past performance with federal aid projects. If you have no federal aid projects, maybe you're new to the program, maybe your administration hasn't done it, then we'll look at local projects as well. So even if you're new to the program, you can still be approved to participate in the program, but your respective ODOT district LPA manager will more than likely have you start with smaller projects based on your staff and your expertise. So we're not going to start you off with a $3 to $5 million project that has many complexities to it. You'll probably start off with a simple resurfacing or guardrail just to get your feet wet and see what the program entails. So why is it important? Why do we have you do this? I know that this form is not the most fun thing. You guys, you build the assets and you guys do it well, so why the form? And we completely understand that. But with federal money comes some federal stipulations and regulations. And so to put this in perspective for you, while it's no fun for you guys to fill out the form, I review them all across the state of Ohio. So just think, it could always be more work. But why are we asking you to complete it? So first, it's part of ODOT's Stewardship and Oversight Agreement with Federal Highway. And we know that that really may not mean anything to you guys, but specifically, the department has to have a risk management analysis tool to determine who can successfully administer local LEP projects. So they didn't tell us what tool, so we had flexibility with that. So ODOT has decided that this tool, this risk management analysis tool, is going to be done through the e-learning modules that correspond with each manual chapter and the participation requirement review form. So this form will help the department ensure your compliance with the federal and state rules and regulations by having you document key staff, project history, and processes. So by requiring the form, the department is taking a risk management approach in regards to participation within the local LEP program to ensure a successful program for everybody. We want to work with you. We collaborate with you guys very frequently, and we want to ensure success on your part as well as ODOT's. And so while documenting processes can seem like a daunting task if none already exist, there is a benefit to you as the LPA as well. So having written processes can make training new staff members easier and more seamless because they outline the requirements and expectations for everybody. So we all know when we lose key staff, we lose knowledge as well. So if you have those documented projects, it helps retain some of that knowledge. Additionally, documented processes can help you in the event of a dispute. So what's the form consist of? The form is currently an Excel spreadsheet that has 4 tabs. The form is designed for the LPA to identify key staff, and with that, who has taken the e-learning modules. So the e-learning modules must be complete and up to date before this form is completed. Project history and processes. The form should be completed by the LPA. So this is for local participation within the local LEP program. So while it is okay for consultants to help, ultimately it is the LPA that has the responsibility for the project oversight. So ultimately the LPA needs to be aware of the expectations, the processes, and the federal requirements. So the first tab is the introduction page. So here is where the LPA will identify the person in responsible charge as well as other key staff members. So the person in responsible charge, it is a federal requirement that they be a full-time employee of the LPA, and on the LPA's payroll. So you could not name a consultant as your person in responsible charge because that does not meet the federal requirement. This tab will also ask you to identify the members on your staff who have completed the e-learning modules. So based on your size and the organizational structure, you may have multiple people who are completing different modules, and that's okay as long as all of the 13 modules are completed by somebody. But it is strongly recommended and highly encouraged that the person in responsible charge be completing all of these e-learning modules as well, as they are ultimately responsible. Tab B is the project history tab. So here the LPA will identify previous successful federal aid projects. And as I mentioned before, if you have not previously administered a federal aid project, successful local examples may be provided instead. So tab C is the bulk of the form. If I'm a betting person, I'd bet it's the reason the majority of you are on this call today, and that's the processes tab. So we're going to ask for processes for items such as consultant services, evaluation and selection, environmental, right-of-way, change orders, dispute resolution, project advertising, bid and award, and project files and record retention. And so for some of these processes, you will have the option of choosing whether you use your own or ODOT's. And then for others, there is no choice. You either have to use ODOT's or you have to use your own, but we'll get into more detail with that later in the following slides. So tab D is for informational purposes only at this point, and to ask the LPA to identify whether they have their own Title VI policy or follow ODOT's. So once you have the form completed, you will send this via email and along with any other attachments to your respective LPA, district LPA manager. They will do an initial review of it. So if anything's missing, any processes are missing or something's not clear or it doesn't follow federal policy, they may send it back to you for revisions. And then once they are satisfied with it, they will send it into the Office of Local Programs for that secondary review. So by the time it gets to the Office of Local Programs, it really should be a very complete form. This is not designed to be a lengthy process, and it's not really designed to be a whole stack. So, we don't want you to gather up hundreds and hundreds of pages. Some people will provide general provisions, bidding documents, contracts, and those aren't really considered processes because it should be a standalone process. Those would be considered supplemental documentation to show that the process was followed. But for these, even if an LPA chooses their own process for all that they're allowed to, it really shouldn't be hundreds of pages of documentation to go through. So we don't want to make this a lengthy or cumbersome process for you guys. So tab A and tab B are pretty self-explanatory, and we just went over them briefly in the previous slide. So we'll jump right into the meat and potatoes of the form, which is the processes. So the consultant services evaluation and selection process, an LPA can elect to use ODOT's process or their own. Honestly, most people elect to use ODOT's, but if you do this, and this caveat applies to all the processes where you elect to use ODOT's, please make sure you know what ODOT's process is. So about 5 or 6 reviews and audits were being conducted. And it was found that LPAs were checking the box that they use ODOT's process. And I get it because it's simple and it's quick and it's easier. But they didn't actually know what the process was because it wasn't being followed when documentation was reviewed. So if you do select it, just make sure you know what it entails and you're following it in the event of an audit or a review. So getting back to the consultant services evaluation and selection process, if you do elect to use your own process, it should address items such as, but not limited to, when you're using direct select versus a quality-based selection, how long and where you advertise for RFQs or RFPs, who is part of the evaluation and how that is done, the matrix used for ranking or scoring, if interviews are conducted with firms, the fee negotiation or determination process, and what happens if fees can't be decided upon with the top ranked firm. So this may seem pretty straightforward. I think we all pretty much know the process, but maybe you have a new auditor coming in who isn't as familiar. So it really should outline this stuff, especially with the fees. I know it seems straightforward that, hey, if we can't agree on fees, we go to the next form, but it always helps to have it spelled out in the event that somebody is reviewing this who is not as familiar as you are. The consultant management process allows an LPA to use ODOTs or use their own as well. So if you are using your own, then this should address items such as who oversees or manages the consultant, how expectations are communicated, whether it be through meetings, emails, and/or telephone calls, and the frequency in which the communications take place. So this may vary based on the complexity of the project, and it's perfectly okay within your process to say that. You know, the amount of meetings and communications vary on the complexity of the project, but at a minimum, we meet X amount of times. So it is okay. You don't have to account for every single scenario within this process. And those are just some of the items. Certainly you can elaborate in more detail, but those are the key items. And you'll see that with all of these processes that I'm just going to give you the high level key items it should address, but of course it could include more. Due to the NEPA assignment and the complexities involved with that, all LPAs must follow ODOT's right-of-way and environmental processes. So you don't have a choice with that. And all of our districts have people who can help you because it is very complex. And then we have central office staff who can provide support to the districts and you as well. So for the change order process, the LPA may elect to use ODOT's process or their own. If using their own, it should address items such as why a change order may be needed, how the price is determined, who reviews and approves the change order from the LPA, that work continues while the change order is being reviewed, what constitutes a significant change order, ODOT's approval of all significant change orders, and ODOT's notification of all change orders. So those last two items, a lot of LPAs, what we're finding, already have their own change order process, but it's for local projects. It doesn't really address, you know, an ODOT project. So a lot of them are missing those two caveats that, you know, ODOT should be notified of all change orders and that they need to approve significant change orders. So if you do have your own process, just make sure it includes those two items. So ODOT does not have to approve all change orders, but your respective district LPA manager needs to be notified of all of them so that they know what's going on with the project and they can stay up to date. So an LPA must have their own dispute resolution claims management process. So this is another one where you don't really get your own choice as to whether you use ODOTs. We did previously have an option where you could use ODOTs, but ultimately ODOT is too large of an organization for its process to apply to most of you guys who opted to use it. So if an LPA does not currently have their own documented dispute resolution process, there are two templates on the Office of Local Programs website under our processes page. And so one is more for a smaller organization and one is for a larger organization. So you can select the template that works best with the size of your organization, and then you can tweak it to match your organizational structure. The goal eventually is to have templates for most, if not all of these processes, but unfortunately, other duties have gotten in the way of that. But it has not fallen off of our radar, but right now the dispute resolution claims management process is the only one we have templates for. We felt that was the most important one since you didn't have an option, you had to use your own. So if an LPA has their own process for the dispute resolution already documented, it should outline each step of the resolution, timeframes for each step, who is involved at each step, and any documentation needed. And this just outlines expectations and timeframes so people know when to move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. So what we have found is that some LPAs have arbitration as a third step with their process. What we will always recommend is that you have mediation as a third step prior to arbitration. And this is just because it's often less costly and can provide a more timely resolution than arbitration. So it does have benefits for you as the LPA as well. So the accounting and reporting. Because each LPA is different regarding staffing, technology, and fiscal processes, and there's no one-size-fits-all, an LPA must have their own accounting and reporting process. And again, this doesn't have to be very lengthy or pages and pages of processes, which is why we gave you guys a box within the form to fill out. So it should outline items such as who reviews the invoices, who approves the invoices, who pays the invoices, because sometimes this is sent to, the auditor, or if you're large enough, your own financial office. It should also outline how federal and local costs are tracked separately, and this is very important for when you compile your schedule of expenditures of federal awards or your CFA. So how they are tracked separately. If the LPA opts for ODOT to pay the contractor directly for the federal or state share, or if the LPA seeks reimbursement from ODOT. And then it would also outline who compiles the CFA and what information is used. So some LPAs have software that's used for accounting, and so this is perfectly acceptable, but then what we're seeing is that a lot of them just put the name of the software and not necessarily the capabilities of it. So if software is being used to track some of these items, please explain the highlights of the capability of the software. So an individual performing the review or audit who may not know would need more detail than we use XYZ software. So that's just always helpful, or else we're going to come back and ask you for more detail. So the project advertising bid and award process, an LPA may use ODOT's or their own. One thing to note with ODOT's process is that it does not address checking the system of award management or the Auditor of State's findings for recovery websites for suspension or disbarment, and it does not cover the intent of the prime contractor to retain at least 30% of the original contract amount. So if you elect to use ODOT's process, you as the LPA will still have to have a process for these two items, and there are boxes underneath that where you can outline it. And again, it doesn't have to be anything lengthy. So for example, the website checks, it could be we check the SAMs and Auditor of State's findings for recovery websites. We print off a screenshot, and when you do that, just ensure that the date is printed on it too. We have gotten some feedback from the Auditor of State that a handwritten date is not necessarily acceptable as proof that this was checked prior to award, because it could be written anytime. So just make sure the date prints on that, and then we put it in the project file. And that's really all it is. And the same for the 30% check. When a contractor submits a bid, they break down the work that they anticipate doing and potential subcontractors. That shows the percentage of the work of each. We review it and ensure the prime is intending to perform at least 30%, and we include it in the project file prior to award. So these don't have to be long, drawn out paragraphs. I mean, 1 or 2 sentences for these two would suffice. As I mentioned earlier, some LPAs submit checklists or excerpts of bidding documents or contracts for these items and others, but these are not considered processes by the auditors because they don't address everything you as the LPA should be doing. They tend to more outline, a combination of you and the contractor, so they don't necessarily address everything. So your process should be a standalone process, and then these would be considered supplemental documentation to be reviewed to show the process is followed. So those two items, even if you elect to use ODOT's process, you'll have to address the website check and the 30%. If an LPA elects to use their own process for the change orders, it should include the project advertising bid and award. It should include length of advertisement and where, when and where bids are opened, how the bids are analyzed, awarding the contract, etc. So even like when and where bids are opened, we know that changes with each project. So just putting bids are opened at the time and date and location stated in the advertisement. Simple. So the disadvantaged business enterprise compliance and the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage compliance, honestly, most elect to use ODOT's process, I would say it's probably 99.99. The reason is that by the time you incorporate everything that should be done, it mirrors ODOT's process anyway. So it's just simpler to check ODOT's. However, if you did want to use your own, it should include items such as who at the LPA is responsible for overseeing compliance, on-site interviews and how often they're conducted, certified payrolls, commercially useful function, and other items that pertain to both of those. So the project files and record retention policy should outline what documents are in the project file and how long they are kept. All project records on a federal aid project need to be kept a minimum of 3 years after the project is closed in FHWA's system. And this will be different than when the project ends or the completion date of the project, because it has to go through a final reconciliation with ODOT's Division of Finance once all the documentation is completed and the final payment made. And then it has to be reviewed by Federal Highway and closed with them. So that central office close date in Ellis corresponds to the date it's closed with Federal Highway, and that starts your 3-year countdown. Some LPAs submit the Secretary of State's retention schedule, and that's perfectly fine. Just one thing I always like to remind people, just be sure it includes enough time to account for the 3-year period for all documentation within the project file. So Federal Highway says the entire project file has to be kept for 3 years. So just ensure that each item is being kept for that 3-year period. Title VI. So right now this tab is for informational purposes only, but it does still need to be completed. You may elect to use your own process or elect to follow ODOT's process. And the reason we're asking you for this information is that each year ODOT's Office of Opportunity, Diversity, and Inclusion are asked to provide an annual summary to Federal Highway regarding ADA and Title VI training. So this is part of the information that they gather from this. So it does still need to be completed so we can ensure the data is accurate. And if you're interested, ODI has a lot of resources on their website. So if you're interested, you can just go to ODOT's website. You can click the little magnifying glass in the upper right-hand corner and search Title VI, and you will get a lot more resources about Title VI. And ODI is great too if you have any questions regarding it, of getting back to you with that. So with that, that is my contact information. I really just hit the high levels, but we can open it up to questions now.
Nicole, I have one question for you. Is there an N on the end of your last name on your email?
Is there a what?
An N?
Oh, there is. Yes, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I just happened to notice that when it popped up. So what we'll do is we'll send out an updated version of the PowerPoint as a PDF to everybody after the webinar concludes.
Yeah, most forget the H. I don't have that ends a new one for me. Sorry about that, guys.
It's all right. So a question from the question box: is the LPA required to have a pre-approved process for advertising, bid, and award of projects that include federal funding?
Yes, so this form, it's a 4-year form, and it's not project specific, but it is wanting to highlight the processes for federal and state rules and regulations. And so one of those is project advertising, bid, and award. And so that would pertain to the federal projects.
Great. I don't see any other questions at this time, but I'm curious, is there, when LPAs have the option to either adopt ODOT's process or have their own process, is there one way or the other that you see that is more successful? I mean, or is it, for folks who adopt the ODOT processes, are they more successful, or the ones who come up with their own, or is it just, really a toss-up between the two?
It really is a toss-up. So previously I would have said having their own is more because they know their process. Until, like I said, with reviews, we were finding that people would check that they follow ODOT's, but then when an audit was being conducted based on the documentation, the process wasn't being followed. So we really did try to get the word out that, hey, we know it's easier to check this box, but you need to ensure that you follow it. So I think that kind of evened the playing field with it. But I think when they have their own, they know that process unless they've done business with ODOT quite frequently. But again, we have our district LPA staff is great. And so they are always there to support LPAs. And if they check that they're following ODOT's process, making sure that that's the case. So I think it's equally successful both ways.
Great. And we have quite a few other questions that came in. I figured people were typing. So Next one, what is the allowable award criteria? Lowest and best, lowest and most qualified?
Lowest and best.
Okay. Next question, is the spreadsheet available online?
It is. So if you go to our Office of Local Programs homepage, we have local processes tab, which has our manuals chapters. So it's in two places. It is under the LPA participation chapter, and then it's also under the training tab.
Great. And then does this apply for design and or construction projects?
It applies for any phase that has federal funding. So for example, your consultant process, if you're using federal funds for design, then that would apply to that phase as well. Typically we see construction, but it could apply to all phases depending on where the federal funding is at.
Great. Next question. This individual said they logged in a little late and may have missed this, but they want to know, how do we know when we need to submit a new LLPRR?
Great question, because I forgot to highlight on that. So good question. So at the start of every state fiscal year, I run a list of the projects for that year and the following year, because so far we've been reactive with these forms and we're trying to get proactive. So I will, for example, towards the end of this month, I will work on state fiscal year 23 and 24 project sponsors. And then I keep a spreadsheet and I will do analysis as to who is good and who is up for renewal. And then I will notify your respective district LPA manager and they will notify you. So it's nothing that you have to keep track of. We do that at ODOT.
All right, and then the next person said, this is the process that local LPAs have been doing for several years, correct? Is there anything that has changed?
So some districts, some LPAs were doing it and some were not. And so then with the passage of 2 CFR 200 and then the revision of our stewardship and oversight agreement, we really hit this harder. And that's when we found out that it was pretty inconsistent across the state. So you may be one that has always done this and this form has undergone several revisions, but it wasn't consistent across the state. So now we're doing a better job of tracking it and to make sure all the documentation in the event that we get reviewed or audited. And I will add, we've participated in a couple peer exchanges with other states who have taken our form as a starting point. And I've seen some versions where it's very thorough and very in-depth. So I will say, just be glad you're not in some of those other states because this form could always be worse.
Well, and a question that came in, could an LPA who elects not to get pre-qualified to go local-led partner with an LPA that is pre-qualified?
No, the LPA that has the funds and who, so we have had instances where maybe a city has asked the county to administer on their behalf. Ultimately, the funds were awarded to the city. And so the city is responsible, the city has to have the person responsible charge. We would treat the county in that instance just like we would treat if the city hired a consultant to kind of help with that. But ultimately, it still is, whether you have somebody else administering the project on your behalf, it is still your responsibility to make sure that you're qualified to administer a local-led project.
All right, next question. I believe many municipalities would be interested in utilizing the ODOT LPA process should they be aware of grants, loans, and safety funding sources. Is there a central location that this information can be found on ODOT's website?
We are working on a couple website updates, and one of those is a resource page for all of our locals, including municipalities. What we have started doing is, and Andrea and Jeff, you may jump in because I don't recall the exact website. I think it's grants.ohio.gov. We have started posting, as well as other state agencies, the funding opportunities. So right now, if you go there, because our small city program is live, you'll see information on that. And then we also include a link which takes you right to the page for that website. So we have started utilizing that for our funding programs as well. So And that'll give you additional grant information through several state agencies. So it's grants.ohio.gov. And then you click on funding opportunities.
Next question. If you have federal funds in another phase, not right-of-way, do you still have to follow ODOT's right-of-way procedure?
Yes. Yeah, because $1 federalizes the entire project. So we would still have to follow NEPA assignment.
All right, there's no other questions that have come in, and we are up to 12:30, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Actually, 2 more popped in, so if you need to hop off the webcast, you're welcome to. Nicole, is the revised FHWA ODOT Project Oversight Agreement available so we can read it?
Andrea?
Sure, I can help you with that one. So FHWA and ODOT work collaboratively every few years to update the Stewardship and Oversight Agreement. And it pertains to the entire department, and the local LET program has a small portion of it. Of course, it's always available for the public to review. And if that's something that you're interested in, certainly email me or email Nicole and we can get a copy out to you. It's one of those things that you might want to read before bed if you have a hard time trying to get to sleep. So, of course, It's always available, but we do try to follow it very closely. And I think the last one was probably updated in 2018 or 2019. So it's every couple years that we update that.
All right, and last question for the day. What is the alternative if a local is not qualified to local LET?
They have to go ODOT LET and let ODOT administer the project. So if you have a smaller staff, this might be a better opportunity, but if you have the capability, default is ODOT LET. And so you would have to go ODOT LET, but that means that ODOT's oversight. So you lose maybe some control with your project. It also means that ODOT is going to charge their labor to your project. Whereas if you're administering it yourself and you have the staff, you know you're going to spend that cost anyway, so you can kind of eat it and more of it goes towards the construction cost. But ODOT will charge their labor to your project as well, which could drive up project cost.
All right, well, we want to thank everyone for joining us for today's quick webcast. And thank you, Nicole, for the excellent job on covering all of this very important information. So
yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
We're happy to have had you, and keep an eye out. There'll be future opportunities for these quick webcasts over the next few weeks and few months, and we will follow up with an email with hopefully a link to the recording if it was successful, but definitely a copy of the updated PowerPoint for everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.